3 days. That is how long it takes for a single midnight conversation to change the architecture of a house. Not the walls. Not the marble floors or the bougainvillea or the fountain that runs day and night like the hacienda's slow mechanical heartbeat. Those things remain exactly as they were. It is the air that changes, the way a room feels when two people who should not be aware of each other become, despite every effort, despite every wall built between them, acutely, devastatingly aware. Miguel Reyes had sat in 3 meetings in 3 days and heard almost nothing that was said in any of them. Valentina Cruz had scrubbed the same section of corridor tile 4 times in 2 hours because her hands needed something to do that. Her mind refused to give them. And Isabella Reyes had watched both of them with the quiet, devastating attention of a woman who has spent 25 years learning that the most dangerous things in the world are the things people are trying hardest not to show. 3 days. And the walls, the beautiful, ancient, blood-soaked walls of the Reyes hacienda had already begun to whisper, "Welcome to episode 2. The walls have eyes. The meeting had started at 9 in the morning. By 10:15, Senor Vargas, Miguel's head of operations for the Northern Corridor, a barrel-chested man with the emotional range of a concrete block, had noticed something he had never noticed in 20 years of working for El Rey. Miguel Reyes was not listening, not in the way powerful, distracted men do not listen, the half-absent scrolling through phones, the impatient waving away of detail. No. This was something more interior, more troubling. Vargas had seen Miguel sit through ambushes, assassinations, federal raids, and the loss of 3 shipments in 1 week without losing the thread of a conversation. He had seen Miguel negotiate million-dollar arrangements while simultaneously eating breakfast and signing documents. He had never seen Miguel Reyes stare at a map without seeing it. "Jefe," said Vargas carefully. "The Colican arrangement. You wanted to review the timeline personally." Miguel's eyes moved back into the room. "Yes," he said. His voice was perfect, unhurried, authoritative, the voice of El Rey. But his hand, resting on the table, had moved half an inch toward the edge. A micro gesture. A reaching towards something not in the room. Vargas noted it, filed it away, said nothing. That was the thing about working for a man like Miguel Reyes. You noticed everything. And you survived by pretending you hadn't. Across the hacienda, in the East Wing corridor, Valentina Cruz was on her hands and knees with a brush, working grout between tiles that were already clean. Because her hands needed the instruction of physical work to keep her thoughts from going somewhere they could not afford to go. The house breathed around them both, waiting. Her sister's voice came through the phone like fresh air from a window you'd forgotten you could open. "Tell me everything," Elena said. She always said this. It was the Cruz sisters' greeting, their hello, their "I missed you" wrapped in 3 words. Valentina almost laughed. Almost. "Everything is fine," she said. A pause. "You sound like someone who's saying everything is fine when everything is not fine," Elena said. 22 years old, and she had always been able to read Valentina through a phone screen from across the city. It was an unreasonable gift and frequently annoying. "How is Mama?" Valentina asked. "The same. Dr. Rezendi says the treatment is working, but it needs more time. The hospital sent another bill." A pause. "I sold the good earrings. The ones Abuela left me." Something in Valentina's chest tightened like a fist. "I'll send more at the end of the week," she said. "Don't sell anything else." "Val." Elena's voice dropped. "Are you okay?" "That place, those people. You don't have to." "I'm fine," Valentina said, and she was. She was fine. She was absolutely, completely fine, and the fact that she had thought about a man's face approximately 47 times since Tuesday was a completely manageable and irrelevant piece of information that her sister did not need. "I'll call Sunday," she said. "Val, Sunday, Eleanor. Give Mama my love." She hung up, sat for a moment with the phone in her lap, the Guadalajara sky above the courtyard wall enormous and blue and perfectly indifferent. Somewhere in the main house a door closed. Her eyes moved to it without permission. She pressed her palms flat on her thighs. "Stop," she said quietly, to herself, to no one. She stood up, straightened her apron, and went back inside. The house received her like a held breath finally released. Doña Carmen had worked in the Reyes house for 18 years. In that time, she had learned things about human nature that no university could teach. She had learned that power made men stupid in very specific and predictable ways. She had learned that women in positions of lesser power were almost always the ones who paid for men's stupidity. And she had learned, with a clarity that sometimes kept her awake at night, that the most dangerous thing that could happen inside these walls was not violence. Violence was fast. Violence was known. The most dangerous thing was slow. Quiet. The kind that built in the space between two people who were trying not to let it build. She had seen it coming with Valentina from the moment the girl had looked up at Miguel without flinching when the vase broke. That look. That clear, unafraid, utterly genuine look. Carmen had felt her stomach drop. Because Miguel Reyes, in 25 years of marriage and a dozen passing arrangements, had never been genuinely seen by anyone. And genuine attention, Carmen knew, was the most seductive thing in the world to a man who had spent his whole life being feared rather than known. She pulled Valentina into the corner near the herb bundles and the dried chilies strung from the ceiling beam. "I'm going to say this once," Carmen said, quietly, without looking at her, steering a pot that did not need stirring. Valentina waited. "This house is a beautiful trap," Carmen said. "You understand. Beautiful. The floors are marble. The food is extraordinary. The pay is good. And every door has a lock on the outside that you cannot see until it closes." Valentina was very still. "I'm not doing anything," she said carefully. "I know you're not," Carmen said. "That's not the problem. The problem is that something is being done." She tapped the wooden spoon on the pot edge. "And it is pulling you into it whether you walk toward it or not. You understand the difference?" A beat. "There are two ways to leave this house," Carmen continued, her voice dropping even lower. "On your own 2 feet, with your life and your dignity and your future intact, or carried." She finally looked at Valentina. Her eyes were not unkind. They were completely serious. "The Senora sees everything. Everything. You remember that?" She turned back to the pot. "Now go. The East Wing corridor needs the baseboards done before lunch." Valentina stood for 1 moment longer. Then she went. And Doña Carmen closed her eyes briefly over the steam of the pot, said a small private prayer to no one in particular, and continued her work. The kitchen filled with the smell of epazote and chili and corn, warm and domestic and completely at odds with the cold knowledge sitting in both women's chests. Here is what most people did not understand about Isabella Dominguez Reyes. They saw the wife. The beautiful, perfectly maintained wife of the cartel boss, attending dinners and managing the household and wearing her diamonds like armor. They saw the role. What they missed was the woman inside the role. Isabella had not simply married into the Reyes empire. She had helped construct it in the early years, before the money was reliable, before Miguel's name meant what it meant, when they were young and broke and building something out of sheer savage will. Isabella had been the one who made the calls. Who managed the relationships? Who understood that power in their world was not purely about force. It was about information, about knowing things other people didn't know you knew. About patience measured not in hours but in years. Miguel had the power and the charisma and the absolute authority that men in his position required. But the mind behind the throne, the strategic, architectural, long-game mind, had always been hers. She had chosen to be invisible about this. For 25 years she had chosen the background. She was choosing the foreground now. The call she made that Thursday morning was to a man named Guillermo Soto, ostensibly a business consultant, in practice a person who moved money and information through channels that had no names. Guillermo had been loyal to Isabella since 1999, when she had done him a favor so significant that the debt between them had never been fully repaid. "I need the Monterey arrangement reviewed," she said. "The one Miguel finalized last month with the Salinas group." "Reviewed how?" Guillermo asked carefully, thoroughly, she said. "I want to know if there are pressure points. Places where the terms could be questioned, renegotiated, delayed." A long pause. "You understand what you're asking," Guillermo said. "I always understand what I'm asking," Isabella said. She was not trying to destroy Miguel's business. Not yet. Not ever. This empire was as much hers as his, and she was not about to set fire to her own house. What she was doing was a test. She needed to know exactly how distracted Miguel had become, whether the fracture in his attention was visible to his business associates, whether she would need to manage things quietly while he recovered his focus, or whether the situation was already beyond quiet management. She was, in the language she preferred, conducting due diligence. On her own marriage, on the threat inside her house, on the exact dimensions of the war she had decided, not in anger, not in pain, but in cold, clear daylight, to fight. She ended the call. Made a note in her small leather notebook in handwriting, so small it was almost a code. Outside her window, Guadalajara shimmered in the midday heat, beautiful and brutal as always. She poured herself a glass of water, drank it, and moved to her next task. Rodrigo Reyes had been telling himself a story for 4 days. The story was that he had no particular interest in the new maid from Tlaquepaque, that he passed through the kitchen in the afternoon because he was hungry, and not because something in the atmosphere of whichever room she occupied seemed more oxygenated than the rest of the house. That he had noticed her the way he noticed any new person in the household, briefly, casually, without significance. It was a completely unconvincing story. He had never been good at lying to himself. Unlike his father, who had built entire architectural systems of self-deception and lived comfortably inside them. Unlike his mother, who did not lie to herself because she did not need to. She saw the truth of every situation with such clinical precision that self-deception was simply unnecessary. Rodrigo was neither of them. He felt things fully and knew that he felt them and found it frequently inconvenient. He pushed open the kitchen door. Valentina was at the long prep counter with her back to him, wiping the surface in long, methodical strokes. She had not heard him come in. He stood for a moment in the doorway. The kitchen in the afternoon, the lunch chaos cleaned away, the light coming golden through the high windows above the herb garden, the smell of dry, chilling cannella still warm in the air, was one of the most peaceful places in the hacienda. He had always known this. "Sorry," he said. "I was looking for—" She turned. Saw him. Something moved across her face, a micro-assessment, quick and professional, and then the careful, respectful blankness of a member of staff. "The pan dulce is in the blue container," she said, nodding to the far counter. "There should be conchas left from this morning." He crossed the kitchen. Found the container, took out a concha, and leaned against the counter, eating it. Valentina returned to her wiping. "You're from Tlaquepaque," he said, not a question. A slight pause in the wiping motion. Then it resumed. "Yes, Señor Rodrigo." "Don't call me that," he said. "I'm 24. It makes me feel like my grandfather." She almost smiled. Almost. He caught the edge of it. "What part of Tlaquepaque?" he asked. Another pause. She looked at him properly this time, measuring whether this was a conversation she could safely have. "Near the craft market," she said. "Behind the Carl Independencia." "I know that street," he said, and then, without fully meaning to, because Rodrigo never fully meant to reveal himself, he simply couldn't stop it. "I used to go there with my grandmother when I was small. She bought Talavera from a woman on that street. Every single time, the same woman, 20 years, same corner." Valentina set down her cloth. "Senora Pacheco," she said quietly. "She was there until 3 years ago. She passed." Something in Rodrigo's face shifted. Yeah, he said softly. She did. A silence that was unexpectedly comfortable sat between them for a moment. Two people who had both, briefly, been in the same corner of the same street in the same city. The vast distance of their circumstances somehow, in this particular kitchen moment, collapsed to nothing. Then Valentina picked up her cloth. The dining room needs to be set for dinner, she said, gently, firmly. Rodrigo straightened up, finished his concha. Right, he said. Thanks for the... He held up what was left of the pastry. She nodded, turned back to the counter. He left, and stood for a moment in the corridor outside the kitchen, eating the last of the concha in the quiet afternoon hallway, with the faintest and most inconvenient feeling that the world had just gotten significantly more complicated. Down the corridor, out of sight, Doña Carmen appeared from a doorway. She had seen. She said nothing. She added it to the list of things inside this house that were moving towards something she could not stop. Padre Hector Villanueva had been the Rise family confessor for 31 years. He had given last rites to Miguel's father. He had baptized Rodrigo. He had blessed this house more times than he could count, walking its corridors with his incense and his prayers, sanctifying rooms that had seen things God was presumably not meant to sanctify. He had confessed every member of this family. He carried those confessions like stones in his chest. He was a small man, shorter than he'd been at 50, curved slightly by the weight of decades. But when he stood at that altar, his presence filled the chapel in a way that had nothing to do with physical size and everything to do with the absolute specificity of his attention. He saw things. He always had. It was, he sometimes thought, his greatest gift and most persistent burden. He saw them now. Miguel Reyes standing in the family pew with the careful stillness of a man maintaining an appearance. The set of his jaw, correct. The position of his hands, correct. But something behind the eyes, behind the composure, that Padre Hector had learned over decades to read the way a doctor reads a symptom. Agitation, something uneasy turning inside, a man who prided himself on being unmovable. Beside him, Isabella. Padre Hector had known Isabella since she was 19. He had seen her become who she was, the accretion of hardness over softness like geological strata, each year another layer, necessary and irreversible. He had heard her confess things in this very chapel that would have ended careers and lives if they'd been spoken outside it. She was praying now with her eyes closed and her hands folded over the onyx rosary. But her stillness was not peace. It was the stillness of a spring compressed. At the back of the chapel, among the household staff arranged in a respectful row, Padre Hector's eyes moved there as they always did, because in his experience the most honest people in any room were usually the ones standing furthest from the altar. He found the new girl immediately. He would have found her even if he hadn't been looking. There was something about her, the quality of her attention, the way she held herself with that particular dignity that poverty and hard work sometimes built in people, that drew the eye. She was looking at the altar, at the crucifix, with an expression of genuine private prayer that Padre Hector recognized immediately because it was increasingly rare in this family's chapel. She was afraid, and she was asking for help. He held the Mass. He spoke the words he had spoken 10,000 times. He raised the host and the chalice in the golden morning light of the chapel. And when it was over, and the family dispersed, and the staff filed out quietly, he remained at the altar. And he prayed. Not the formal prayers, the other kind. The kind where an old man who has seen too much simply speaks honestly into the silence and hopes something is listening. Lord, said Padre Hector quietly, this house is about to break itself apart, and I am too old and too tired and possibly too complicit to stop it. So I'm asking you, somewhat against my better judgment given our recent track record, to show at least one of these people the door before the ceiling comes down. He paused. Any of them, he added. I'm not particular. The candles burned. The fountain ran in the courtyard outside. The hacienda breathed. No answer came. It never did. He blew out the altar candles and went to find his breakfast. He told himself he was going for a drink. He told himself this precisely and deliberately as he buttoned the top 2 buttons of his shirt, which he would not have bothered to do if he was simply going for a drink. Miguel Reyes descended the staircase. The great hall was dark and still. He crossed to the drinks cabinet in the library. Poured 2 fingers of añaco, sat in the leather chair. He did not drink it. He sat there for 12 minutes, he counted, and then he stood up and walked, without further internal debate, toward the east wing corridor. She was not there. The corridor was dark and empty and smelled of the floor wax she used. He stood in the dark hallway, feeling something he had not felt since he was perhaps 20 years old, the specific and terrible vulnerability of having wanted something and found it absent. Then he heard it. The courtyard fountain. He walked through the arch. She was there. Not cleaning, not working, just sitting on the steps at the fountain edge in the lamplight, her knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them, looking at the water. She had not heard him yet. She had her earphones in. He stood under the bougainvillea arch for a moment. Then he sat down on the step beside her. She pulled out an earphone. Did not look startled, did not look pleased. Looked, with those dark, honest eyes, like someone who had known this was coming and had argued with herself about it and lost. "You came back," she said. "Yes," he said. "You shouldn't." "No," he agreed. They sat. The fountain ran between them and around them and past them toward whatever came next. Above the hacienda, the Guadalajara sky was enormous and indifferent, scattered with stars that had been there before any of this and would be there long after. "Tell me something true," Miguel said. It was not a question he had planned. It arrived from somewhere below the usual architecture of who he was. Valentina was quiet for a moment. "I'm afraid," she said. "Of me?" he asked. "Of this," she said, and she gestured, a small, encompassing gesture at the distance between them, the courtyard around them, the house behind them, the city below, the whole impossible situation they were both sitting inside. Miguel looked at the fountain. "So am I," he said. Valentina turned to look at him, and Miguel Reyes, the most feared man in Jalisco, let her. He let her look. Without performing authority, without curating the impression, just a man. Tired and complicated, and sitting beside a fountain at midnight in a city that kept secrets. Just a man. Above them, in the dark of the east corridor, a light moved. A lamp. Carried by a figure who had not been able to sleep. Isabella. She stood at the arched window above the courtyard. She looked down. Her face did not change, but in her hand the lamp trembled. Just once. The smallest human fracture in the most controlled woman in Guadalajara. Then she turned from the window and walked back to her room. And the courtyard below, neither of them having seen her, continued in its quiet, impossible way. The fountain ran. The stars were indifferent. The walls watched. And episode 2 drew its breath toward its close with the particular tension of a story that knows, even if its characters don't, that the window for quiet resolution has just closed. By morning, the hacienda had returned to its performance. Miguel sat behind his desk and conducted the business of his empire with sufficient focus to reassure his men, if not entirely himself. Isabella moved through the house with her usual precision, attending to the 100 details of managing a household of this size and complexity, speaking to staff with measured authority, exchanging with Miguel the exact phrases of a long marriage, enough words to fill the silence, not enough to fill the space between them. Rodrigo sat by the pool with a book he did not read, and Valentina Cruz worked. She worked the way she had always worked, thoroughly, invisibly, with calloused hands and quiet dignity. She cleaned the east corridor. She polished the dining room table until she could see her own face in it. She arranged fresh marigolds in every room. She did not allow herself to think about the courtyard. She almost succeeded. The house moved around all of them, breathing, watching, holding its secrets in its ancient walls the way it always had. The fountain ran. The bougainvillea bloomed. The iron gates stood closed at the end of the long cypress driveway. Below, in the city, Guadalajara went about its magnificent, complicated, beautiful life, church bells and market vendors, and jacaranda petals on the cobblestones, and the smell of carnitas on a Thursday morning, and somewhere always the low, distant hum of a city that has survived everything thrown at it for 500 years. But something had changed. Something had crystallized in the night air of that courtyard. Two people had spoken the truth to each other, and the truth, once spoken, cannot be unspoken. And upstairs, in a bedroom lined with beautiful things, a woman who had spent 25 years building her life around one man's attention had felt it turn, like a compass needle, towards someone else. The lamp had trembled. That was all. That was enough. The war had begun. Not with a declaration. Not with a confrontation. Not with fire and fury and the breaking of things. With a trembling lamp. With a woman turning away from a window. With the terrible quiet of someone who has decided. Next week, the walls stop watching and start closing in. Hell hath no fury.